Hi guys, so what I'm doing is I'm looking at a worksheet that I gave you on your body's defenses. And it's just another way of like kind of reviewing what I just went over in my first video, which are the first, second, and third lines of defense. And this worksheet showed that nicely. It was showing like the intact skin and the mucous membranes being like the first line of defense. And then the antimicrobial substances, that's like the complements that come from things like eosinophils and basophils, inflammation, and the phagocytes out there that are the big eat 'em up guys and the little eat 'em up guys. And then finally, the third line of defense, which is the specific immune response. So that's what we're going to get into. And I'm going to set that worksheet aside. And, wrong sheet here. Okay. So I'm going to get into first the cellular response. I don't have a lot written here. So you're going to have to bear with me with writing out a lot of this stuff. When it comes to the cellular response, I want you to think T cells. Okay. And I want you to think these are the Marines that I talked about. But there's all different kinds of T cells. And I think it's almost like best to like talk about the cellular response by talking about all these different types. Now, the first and most important one that I'm going to mention is the helper T cell. The helper T cell is like the general. Okay, the general in charge. He is the one that is going to first identify the antigen. Remember, antigen is the bad guy. The helper T cell is going to identify this. We've already talked about this, how like a macrophage, a big eat 'em up guy, presents these antigen presenting cells. Like macrophages can be them, B cells can be them, and also these dendritic cells, all different kinds of white blood cells. Some we mention more often than others. But anyway, these antigen presenting cells, APCs, are going to present kind of like a mugshot or a fingerprint on the antigen to the helper T cell. And the helper T cell, really, they're presenting it, remember, on their surface. They're providing a little piece of that guy on their surface. And the helper T cell is really there to really learn quite a bit about this and say, is this really something that we need to deal with? Okay, so this kind of recognition is a very specific recognition. This is one of the reasons why they call it the specific immune response, and it's very important because he must identify the enemy, and then he must notify the troops, not only other T cells, but also other B cells. Okay, so the helper T cell is the general, and it's very important that he identifies and alerts. Okay, now how does he identify it? We talked about that. That's that close communication where it's like contact, direct contact. How does he alert? Cytokinins. Cytokines for short. Cytokinin is the protein. Cytokines are the collective group of that. The cytokines get released. But also, he multiplies. He divides. Multiply. Okay, he divides and he makes more of his own kind, and he makes more of his own kind that are going to become another type of T cell. Okay, so that's the helper T cell. He's probably one of the most important ones. That's the one also that the HIV virus actually infects. Take out the general and you really take out the whole kit and caboodle there, the whole army. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is the cytotoxic T cells. Okay, I'm not going to put T cell after all of these. You know, these are all T cells. Cytotoxic T cells, I like to call them the killers. These are the ones that are going to get down on the ground. These are like the true Marines. So is the helper T cell, but he doesn't get involved in the killing so much anymore. He's got like a more important role to play. These killers, though, how they do is they really literally latch on like a key into a lock onto a cell that might be presenting the antigen or the antigen itself. It latches on. You know, should the antigen be a bacteria cell, it latches on. And then it literally injects into it cytokines and other kinds of proteins that are literally going to kill it. I often, this sounds morbid a little bit, but I often liken it to like people like in the war when they were dying or something, and you saw them dying and they're suffering, okay, the killer T cells would be the ones to go up and like stab them to death or something. I mean, that sounds awful, but that's what killer T cells do. When a cell is dying or when it's infected, the killer T cell is there to just end it quick. Okay, so they end it quick. So let's say end quickly. Okay, they do a job that, a lot of other cells, don't step up to the plate to do. So that's the cytotoxic T cells. The next ones are super important. I'm going to talk about the memory T cells. And the memory T cells, these are the ones that are going to remember. They're watching this whole thing. They were also divided and made from the helper T cell. He divided, made hundreds of thousands of cells. Some became killers, some became memory, and they learn about this thing. And they will learn and linger. Okay, so I'm going to say they learn and linger. They linger in your immune system for, sometimes the rest of your life. Okay, sometimes they die off. Okay, but most of the time they learn and they linger in your immune system. They learn about this specific antigen. Remember, all of these cells that we're talking about, we're talking like there are helper T cells for chickenpox. There are helper T cells for the flu. There are helper T cells for the common cold and another common cold and another common cold and maybe even COVID-19. And they're killers for COVID and flu and common cold and chickenpox and tetanus and all of these things. You have all these specific cells all in your body. And as you get older, you build up a bigger and bigger army. And this is why like older people are usually a little bit better at like fighting off disease. And older people, not like severely elderly where their bodies aren't working efficiently, but older, maybe even like me, okay, that has gone through like quite a few years and quite a few diseases over the years. And I've learned to fight them off, or I've taken vaccines that fight them off. And we'll get to vaccines in a little bit. So we have our memory T cells that are remembering all this. And I've got tons of them floating through my body. I think about how like I would get sick every year for a while. I always called it my Christmas cold. And so I have these memory T cells like remembering that. Okay. Then there's also another very important one called the suppressor T cells. Okay. Suppressor T cells. Suppressor T cells are kind of like they're watching the fight also. And they're the ones that are going to say, okay, all right, halt, stop. Everything's like, taken care of. We got to like stop. They're the ones that kind of pull back the troops when the enemy has been defeated. And that's very important. Okay. So we say that they are the peacemakers, Okay. They end the fight. Okay. And again, they do this by releasing anti-cytokines. Okay. So cytokines kind of like rev up everybody, but anti-cytokines will kind of like appease everybody and say, okay, threat's over. And then there's one other one that we want to mention, but I'm going to put him way out here. I'm actually going to draw a line here because he's really not part of the cellular response. And we already mentioned him. Those were the natural killer cells, the natural killers. Okay, not to be confused with the killers. Those are the cytotoxic ones. Natural killers were, remember, innate. That word innate. They go after anything they caused. Yep, you said it. Apoptosis. All right. And remember, I'm isolating them over here because they really are not a part of this specific immune response. Okay. It's really these 4 T cells that we have to pay attention to. All right. And that's the T cells for us. They elicit what we call a cellular response. Okay. And in looking at this worksheet that you have, the adaptive immune system, T cells, B cells, we're going to get to B cells in a moment, T cells. Okay, that's what we just talked about, the different kinds of T cells. Here we have cytotoxic, the helpers, and even the memories. Regulator cells, let me put that in there. Suppressors are sometimes called regulators. Regulator cells. Now, one last thing I want to talk about is like formation of T cells. Where do they get their name from? And this is true. They develop in the bone marrow, And a lot of times that bone marrow that they're developing in is your big old femur bone, your thigh bone. But they mature in the thymus gland. The thymus gland, actually in you guys and me, is actually quite small. It's largest when you're a baby. In fact, T cells, they develop in the bone marrow. They migrate to the thymus gland where they mature. They kind of go to school there. But then they only do that up until like the first year of life. Then once they leave school, they go to your lymph glands and then go to lymph glands, or they kind of live out their older years, and actually that's where they'll do their functions. That's where they'll become either a helper T cell, and he'll divide, and all their like roles are there. So right now in all your lymph glands, those are the glands like in your neck, they're under your arm, they're in your groin, and actually there's quite a few behind your six-pack abs in your stomach. Okay. And that's where all your T cells are. They started out in the bone marrow, they went to the thymus gland, and now they're in your lymph glands, and they'll be there the rest of their lives. And you can't even make any more of these. So they can only divide in your lymph glands. You can't make more from the bone marrow because the thymus gland is not going to teach them. It's kind of like that school has been shut down. Okay, so that's an interesting thing about T cells. So T cells often, if you think thymus gland, that starts with a T, T cells. And that's it for our cellular response, and this is again part of the adaptive immune system, which is your third line of defense. Okay, and next we'll talk about the humoral response, which are the B cells.